All right, I want to get a couple of regional stories here. We're going to start off with Shelley Silver, former Assembly Speaker, found guilty, as you know, of corruption late last year. It was a trial that rocked Albany here, and the idea of corruption and transparency, or lack thereof, out of the Capitol. But just today, the court unsealed some of the documents about Silver. Prosecutors say Silver had 2 affairs, and both women politically connected. Silver even had a separate cell phone used just for one of them. Papers say one of them was a lobbyist who did business with the state. The other got a state job with the help of her connected friend, Shelley Silver. Now, Silver's attorneys say there was no quid pro quo, of course not, and that these are just salacious allegations. Don, forget that this doesn't look good. There'd always been rumors, we'd heard here about Silver and at least one particular affair in question, okay? But it's more than just infidelity. This is now also about, even though the attorneys deny it, certainly the perception that you got something, you get something.
Well, Richard, this is a mess. One of the women, any political reporter worth their salt knew about this affair.
Yeah.
She was his former communications director, who went on to start her own lobbying company, and for some reason her company did extremely well with the speaker. So this is a mess because you have Mr. Barrera, aka Elliot Ness, looking into this. We're talking about now it's going to mushroom into what state she had business, New York State business, before. All of this is it's one big mess. And that's just one of the women. Every political reporter in New York knows who the other woman is. And once that drops, that's going to be worse than the communications director.
And tell me if you agree with this. There's a feeling, we talked about this on the air before, that forgetting even the affairs, the thought was Shelley Silver, whatever anyone thought of him, probably the smartest guy in Albany, certainly politically, and being able to control the levers and to control leverage, certainly in Albany. 3 men in the room for a long time for a reason. That said, people always wondered, he had a lot of information if he wanted to trade. And he never seemed to do the trade at the end of the day. There's a feeling that if they're making Shelley Silver an example about this, he's not the only guy in Albany with some questionable outside the office activities here that also could have blended into some maybe improper use of office.
Richard?
Do you like how I politically said that? Yes.
Yeah, this is just the beginning of what's going to be a mess.
We were wondering what the second shoe for Bahara was. We now know it.
Federal Judge Valerie Caproni decided to release this information. Trust me when I tell you, the second mistress, that's going to be worse than the one that was his communications director.
And remember, there's kind of a connection, albeit in a different salacious part, with Skelos, right? Because remember his son, remember his son obviously getting preferential treatment because of the father trying to find him jobs and then trying to direct business to it in a different way with obviously a different relationship. It's the same kind of narrative.
It's exactly.
Favor trading,
It's
right?
the same narrative over and over again. Look at the arrest just the other day in Rockland County by Mr. Barrera as it relates to the ballpark in Pomona.
Yeah.
It's just all of this, Richard. It is one big mess, and there are going to be a lot of other shoes to drop. What happens with the women? Are there going to be criminal investigations into the mistresses? It's a mess.
And the question is, again, Albany in effect said, okay, it's these 2. After so many other lawmakers got in trouble, it's just these 2, and they never enacted their own reforms, at least to the public satisfaction, that changed the entire culture. And the governor maybe couldn't have got it through, but trust me, Bahara's not going away. So I don't know what Cuomo should or shouldn't do next, but there we go. All right, now we pivot across the river to New Jersey and a defeat for Governor Chris Christie. Governor just nominated a Democrat, Walter Tampone, to the state Supreme Court. Now that's after the Democrats refused to even consider Christie's Republican nominee. And this significant, Steve, for me, because it shows, I think in a very naked way, how vulnerable and how not feared, maybe in a better way to frame it, this governor is today versus before he started his campaign and certainly before Bridgegate. This capitulation and how blatant it was after he pushed his own guy and it went nowhere, that wasn't in his playbook before. The dynamic has changed significantly, hasn't it, in Trenton?
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. I think Governor Christie is not to be underestimated in terms of his political agenda. Remember, he fought appointing a Democrat to the Supreme Court for 6 years, even though there was a tradition in New Jersey of a bipartisan Supreme Court, and it should be half Republican appointees, half Democrat. Christie said no. For 6 years, all of a sudden, he changes his mind. Now, granted, Mr. Tim Pone, the nominee of Governor Christie to the Supreme Court, is a friend of Governor Christie's, served with Governor Christie in the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I believe there's more there than meets the eye, and perhaps in the Senate hearings, the state Senate hearings in Trenton, which are obligatory after the governor makes the nomination, we'll learn more. But people in New Jersey are a little bit cynical about what Governor Christie's motives are, given the big right turn he made away from a moderate New Jersey Republican governor to something that Christie thought, would appeal to the base vote in the Republican national presidential primaries. He was appealing to Tea Partiers, and that's not most of New Jersey Republicans.
You know, I had a signpost. Every year I would go down and this walk to Washington, that train ride from Newark down to D.C., and you'd have...
You poor thing.
Yeah, I tell you. And it was the entire delegation from the Assembly and the Senate, a bunch of mayors and everything else. And I was always struck in a blue state by how many, not just Republicans, but Democrats feared saying anything on the record that would take on Christie because of not just his popularity at the time, but because they thought he's not a guy worth crossing. I certainly don't get that sense right now. There has been a sea shift, hasn't there, in terms of what kind of a stick he really still wields in Trenton?
You are right, and you're reading the political landscape in New Jersey correctly, but this is a big deal. To appoint a Democrat, for Chris Christie to appoint or nominate a Democrat to the New Jersey Supreme Court, it's a big deal, especially since he didn't do it for 6 years, claiming that he was acting on principle. So something significant has happened. We have yet to learn what that is.
Well, let me ask you one last thing on Atlantic City. Certainly there's been a lot of posturing back and forth. We've had the mayor guardian of Atlantic City a few times. The most compelling argument I think that he's made is, listen, whatever you think, we did what they told us to do. We met all the guidelines laid out by the state. We don't have the authority, even if we wanted to, not to. We have to. Every hire has to be approved by Trenton. So whether we had or didn't have the discretion doesn't matter. We followed their rules, and now they're going to pull the plug. What does he want us to do? They pushed back some deadlines. There's a floated proposal right now. At the end of the day, does Trenton make the funds available for Atlantic City, or even on a delayed deadline, is it you're on your own?
I would be surprised if Trenton doesn't come to the rescue of Atlantic City in one way or another, even after the deadline, assuming they don't meet the deadline. But there are real differences. The Democratic leader of the state Senate differs from the Democratic leader of the state Assembly, and they differ from the Republican governor of New Jersey. So there's a lot, and there's a lot of ill feeling about perhaps some of the money given to Atlantic City over the years was not spent all that well.
And also casinos in the north as well.
We have yet to find out.
We're right up against break, but it cannot be overstated, and to the uninitiated, and you know this better than anybody, New Jersey, as much as it's Republican Democrat, it's north and south. And for the folks who don't realize this, depending geographically where you are in the state, it could be two different worlds.
It's not personal, it's just the way things are.
Yes, that's a good way to say it. All right. Coming up next, some big names talk to RFL. Feminist icon Gloria Steinem talks about Donald Trump, and she's not too happy, as you'd expect, with the Donald. Then Robert F. Kennedy Jr., what he says, there are a lot more Flint, Michigans out there as well. Their conversations with Dom, straight ahead.